Hello, good afternoon. This is Małgorzata Kurzępa from Her House Investments. Fair House Investments is the company which invests in properties in UK for over 7 years and 10 years altogether, because previously I used to live and work in Poland and I established my first company there. Then I moved to UK. I moved my company with me, I moved my business with me, and whatever I love I was doing in Poland, now I'm doing it in UK. So for over 7 years I'm a founder and director of Fair House Investments, and I'm investing in properties. Usually, most of my properties are single lets, so nothing complicated, nothing sophisticated, just simple vanilla single lets. Recently, I started investing in service apartments in system rent to rent, so this is something new to my company. And I also started educating you guys because I realized that there is a huge demand for the knowledge about properties, and plenty of people are interested, but they don't know how to start, they don't know where to start, they're looking for knowledge, they don't know where to go to get this knowledge, especially the knowledge which is for free. So every Sunday around 1 p.m. I'm coming to you and I'm telling you something new about the property business. Wait a minute, something happened. Something happened to my notes. So today I wanted to tell you a little bit about the unexpected things which you can find when you are viewing the property. It doesn't mean these are usually things you will find out about before you buy it, okay? Before the purchase. Sometimes, if the issue is serious, then you would be stopped from purchasing it by your lender usually. But not everybody's buying using a mortgage. Sometimes we're buying with a cash. So in such situations, we have to be specifically careful, particularly careful, because we don't want to lose our money. So if you don't have much experience in property business, in renovating, in building or whatever, please, when you go for the viewing, before you purchase or before you consider purchase of the property, take with you someone who has a little bit of experience, at least a little bit of experience. Such person will not only help you assess the cost of the refurbishment, but he also, using his or her experience, they could point your attention towards things which are could be difficult to fix or maybe expensive to fix, but also sometimes they discourage other investors from buying, while actually when you have an expert with you who can assess it and could tell you how much it would cost, then you could just include the cost of this repair to your budget, and maybe the property would be still a good deal for you. So what I'm talking now is things that discourage average investors, but shouldn't discourage you, or in some situations they will. But I will tell you everything about it. So first thing, there are some properties which don't have a proper kitchen or proper bathroom. They are basically inhabitable, which means you would never ever get a mortgage for such a property. Is it a big deal? No. Would it discourage average investor? First-time investor, maybe, but if you're prepared to buy the property for cash, it's not a big deal, because you purchase it with cash, you refurbish it, you fix everything, you put new kitchen, new bathroom, everything would be nice and clean and fresh, and after minimum period of time, which is usually 6 months, you will start looking for the lender and who would remortgage it for you, and you get your money, most of your money back from this property. So lack of kitchen and lack of the bathroom, it's not a big deal for experienced investor. Another aspect of if the property has no bathroom or no kitchen, which means it's inhabitable, it means if you purchase this as an investor, in theory, if you're buying investment property, you have to pay extra 3% of stamp duty on this property. If property is inhabitable, you don't have to pay extra 3% of the stamp duty. So keep it in mind. Another thing is damp. And now first I want to tell you a little bit about the condensation. So the dark drops at the ceiling, usually at the corners, usually bathroom or sometimes your kitchen. the problem is the lack of proper ventilation. So remember, usually in AST, the tenants are informed that they should ventilate the property properly, and they shouldn't, for example, they shouldn't dry their clothes inside the property. But we know how people are. Sometimes they just do it, and they don't ventilate properly. So if you come to the property and you see the condensation at the ceiling, usually it's not a big deal, because you know very well how to get rid of it. Especially if you change the tenant. Usually the new tenant is a different one. So first you could educate, or you should educate your tenant. Second thing, you should just clean properly the ceiling or the corners of the between ceiling and walls. You should clean it with Domestos or any bleach which remove the damp. Sometimes, in a very serious cases, you should remove the external surface of the wall and repaint it with the proper anti-damp paint. And as I said, again, please educate your tenants and ask them to keep the proper ventilation to the bathroom or kitchen. This is usually the main thing. It's not only look bad, but it also smells bad. So it's just unpleasant feeling when you get to the property. But as I said, it could discourage someone without an experience, but not you. You are an experienced investor. You can do it. It's not a big deal for you. Another reason why there is a condensation in the property is the lack of proper insulation. It happened to me twice already. One was the case where the kitchen was in an extended part of the building and the ceiling didn't have a proper insulation. And another case was the bathroom was an extension, and bathroom was in an extension of the building, and again there was no proper insulation on the floor, so there was a condensation on the walls next to the floor. It really surprised me. I've never seen it before, but you know, we learn all our life, and almost each property brings me a new experience. So this is how it is. Another kind of damp is so-called rising damp. This one is much more serious. And because some of the properties in UK, they don't have proper foundations, sometimes the wall basically suck the water from the ground. And the rising damp looks like it's going from down of the wall, from the floor, it's going up. So you can see this is a rising damp. And how can we deal with it? First of all, we could isolate the foundation if there is any foundation. You could isolate the lower part of the wall, but you can always also drill small holes in the wall and put a specific gel into the wall. You can do it from outside, you can do it from inside. That's the method. The gel is slightly different, but the method is basically similar. If you do it from inside, you have to remove the external part of the wall, drill the holes, inject the gel into the wall, and put the proper surface on the wall and just paint it. It should works. But to be honest, if I see the property which has extended rising damp, and recently I was viewing the property which also has holes drilled already from outside, and there was still rising damp in a property, I gave up. I wasn't interested, because it means that there is a serious problem with excess of water underneath the property, and maybe it won't be easy, or maybe it wouldn't be possible at all to remove it. So if it's localized, that's fine, we can deal with it. But if it's extended, I wouldn't go for it. Considering how much I spend on my properties, I wouldn't like to deal with such a problem. Sometimes it happens that there is the wet wall is within the middle of the building, and you think like where the water is coming out. But then when you go outside, usually the most common reason is just a broken gutter. So you fix the gutter, you do the same with, you should inject when you fix the problem. It's good to wait a little bit to give it the wall the chance to dry. If it doesn't want to dry, then unfortunately you have to remove the surface, inject the wall, put the new surface, paint, done. Another thing, if you come to the property with a dump, you just smell the dump. So when the property is old and dirty and no one cared about it for a longer period of time, you could just smell the old place. But be very careful, because it's very important to try to find a dump before you purchase the property. It happens that old properties has wallpapers or sometimes plasterboards, and the dump could be underneath any of these, so be very careful. The next thing is when the wall is broken. You see the crack in the wall, and when you don't have much experience, you can't actually say if this is only the surface broken or this is really the proper crack to the proper wall. So in such situation, I strongly advise you to hire a structural engineer who will come and take a proper look. He will tell you if the crack is only superficial, so it could be easy fixed. If this is a proper crack to the wall, but for example it happened 20 years ago and there is no issue with the building falling down or the wall falling down, it has just cracked, and it's cracked after fixation, it would be okay. Or the third worst scenario is that building is the wall is falling down. The entire building is cracking because, for example, on unstable ground, and then fixing such a wall would be probably the most expensive. Again, he should give you the quotation for each kind of repair, and then again you can add it to your budget. If if the number still stacks together, why not? But remember, this is the thing that definitely discourages someone who doesn't have much experience. Especially in Midlands, but actually it's quite popular all over UK. There were old mines, and sometimes the property you want to purchase is located over the old mine. So there is a risk that the ground is not stable and it could collapse. I've seen the garden which collapsed. Believe me, it wasn't funny or wasn't nice at all. Fortunately, the house was still in place, but eventually the company which was responsible for their old mine, they were also responsible for fixation. So basically, they filled the hole in the ground with something, and everything went up, but the ground was at even surface. But believe me, it was really, really horrible. And it took a while. So if you rent such a property, you have to remove the tenants, it's an extra expense for you. But the good thing about unstable ground is that before you purchase the property, you do searches. And for the searches applies your conveyancer, and he applies to the council, and council check everything and send him and you back the report. So unstable ground and the increased risk of flood, they would appear in such searches. So if your conveyancer would inform your lender, don't worry about it. So if your lender realizes that the risk of unstable ground or the flood is very, very high, he just withdraw his offer, and it means the risk is too high for him, which also means the risk is too high for you. Don't even have in mind the idea of going and purchasing such a property for cash. Please don't. First of all, it would be difficult to get an insurance for such a property. Second thing, something could really happen. I told you, it really, really happens that ground or the buildings collapse. Or I've seen personally the house which was flooded, and believe me, this is nothing really nice. In such a case, there were also issues with the insurance, so really horrible experience for the owner. Anyway, if the lender decide that the risk is very small and he could take a risk, it means you could also take a risk, and no issues, you can purchase the property, especially if you purchase it with the mortgage. Another kind of property is probate properties. The probate means that someone who lived in the property passed away, and now someone who inherited the property is selling it. There is no issues with such a properties. They are quite normal properties, exactly the same as others at the market, so you can easily go and buy it. Repossession properties. There is a little issue with repossessions because, again, a repossession property means that someone who owns the property stopped paying the mortgage, and the lender took over the possession of the property, and now he's trying to sell it to get his money back. So you can buy such a property, but remember, if you put your offer has been accepted, you started the process of purchase. Remember, it's usually around 12 weeks. You have to pay the initial fee to the conveyancer. You have to pay for the searches. This is usually 300-400 pounds. But if another client appears who would offer the lender the higher price, he just bid over you, and you in this moment you lost your property. So you have to be prepared to or lose the money you pay to the conveyancer and for searches, or increase your offer. So again, put all the numbers together. If they stick, you can increase your offer. If they don't, you just withdraw, and unfortunately you lose the money you pay to the conveyancer. It happens. What was it? Sorry, I'm lost. I have my notes because I'm trying to do not miss anything. But believe me, this subject was so difficult because there's so many things. So there are a few more I wanted to tell you about. The next one, the property has few owners. Remember that if you if you purchase the property in England, each side, the seller and the buyer, could pull out in a very last moment. So if on the opposite side are few owners, opposite sides from you the buyer, there are few owners, there is a risk that each of them could change their mind and pull out in the very last moment. Just keep it in mind. The risk is not high, but it happens. You have to take it under consideration. The next thing I want to tell you about is something called regulated tenancy. Most of tenancies we have nowadays are short hold tenancies. But if the tenancy started before 1989, some of them are called regulated tenancies, and they are special tenancies set by the government for the people who need a special care. They give better, higher, more important rights to the tenants than in the situation when the tenants use AST. So if you purchase the property with the tenants which has regulated tenancy, remember, it would be more difficult to get rid of them. This is what everybody's saying, but actually what you have to do if you want to remove such tenants from the property, you have to basically go to the court. So there is no difference between regulated tenancy and AST. If the tenant doesn't want to move out, you want him to move out, you have to go to the court, you have to get a court order. And of course, you have to give the sensible reason why are you trying to get rid of him. Most of the cases is basically when they don't pay the rent. Another thing about regulated tenancy is that there is something called fair rent, which means that the rent they pay is usually below the market value, below the market rent, and how much is it is set by VAO officers, so you cannot influence the rent you receive. And the third important thing about regulated tenancies is that it could be inherited. which is called succession. The good thing is that could happen only once, but remember, if someone as a young person started living in the property, meanwhile he got married and now he's living in the property with his wife, even if he passed away, she basically inherited the tenancy. So she has full rights to stay in the property. The tenancy looks exactly the same. She could pay the same rent, and you have to deal with such a tenant. If the tenant is great, of course, this is not a big deal. Another thing, what I've noticed about such regulated tenancy, if I already mentioned that, some of these people are more vulnerable. So sometimes it's difficult to deal with them, but sometimes you just have to take it under consideration, because I know, I have a very, very soft heart. I don't know how to exactly say it, in English, but it's just, these are people who really needs to be taken care of. So if you don't want to deal with such a deal, just don't go for property with regulated tenancy in it. And the last thing is short lease. It's probably the most popular. Usually when we buy the property with the mortgage, and this is a leasehold property, I'm talking about flats. There are some houses which are also leaseholds, but usually there is the line is that leasehold are flats and houses are freeholds. So now we're talking about the leasehold property, which is usually a flat. If the lease is above 80 years, we could just increase the lease, and this is not a big deal. If this is below 80 years, then if you want to increase the lease, of course you have to pay the fee to the landlord, means the owner of the ground. But when you try to sell such a property, there is a law called marriage value, which means from your income from the sale, difference between selling price and the value of the property in the moment when you increase the lease, this income you have to split 50-50 with the vendor, with the landlord, with the owner of the ground. So keep it in mind. If you increase that, you should always increase your lease when it's still more than 80 years. If we're talking about the mortgage for leasehold properties, the law says that the length of the lease should be at least 25 years in the moment when your mortgage ends. Which means if you get a mortgage for 35 years, it should be at least 60 years in the moment when you purchase it. From practical point of view, most of the lenders do not give you a mortgage if the lease is shorter than 75 years. Between 75 and 70, you could still find few lenders who borrows you money. Below 65 is almost impossible. Is it possible to buy such a property for cash? Of course. Is it a good idea? I still think it's a good idea. Of course, again, you have to put all your numbers all together. But you could only increase your lease when after 2 years period of time. So from the moment when you buy it, you have to wait 2 years until the moment when you could apply for increasing of the lease. So in a special situation, for example, when someone is selling the property on which the lease is 82 years, and you know that you have to be fast, with application to increase the lease, but you have to wait at least, you will have to wait 2 years for it, then you could ask the seller to increase, to apply for increasing the lease on your behalf, and then the vendor applies, but the rights would be yours for the lease. So this is the option we can use. And what else about the lease? Yeah, I think this is all. So this is, as I said, this is not a bad idea to buy a property with a short lease, but you have to keep in mind the expenses. You will have to, for increase, you have to pay the landlord, so the owner of the ground. And if the lease is shorter than 80 years, you also have to pay him extra 50% of your income in the moment when you sell this property. So this is all I wanted to tell you about. It's too long again. Every Sunday around 1 p.m. I'm coming to you with another short video about something connected to investing in properties in UK. I ran my investment company by myself for over 7 years in UK, and I'm delighted I could share my experience with you every Sunday. It was Małgorzata Kurzępa, Fair House Investments. Have a wonderful Sunday afternoon. Bye bye.